Welcome to Stillwater Chronicles. Tonight, we settle into a story about a door that should never be opened.
There is something about a long hallway at night that feels like the edge of a question. Not a question you asked, one that simply arrives, one that waits at the end of the corridor, patient, unmoving, and watches you decide whether to come closer. If you have ever stood at the top of a dark staircase or peered down a passage that stretched further than you expected, you know the feeling. That small, quiet tightening in the chest, that pause, the moment before you take the next step, when part of you wonders if you should. That is where we find Sarah. She had been living in the house for 3 weeks before she noticed how long the hallway really was. It wasn't that she hadn't walked it. She had, every morning, every evening, the path from her bedroom to the kitchen and back again. But she had done it the way you do familiar things, without looking, without measuring. The way a road you have driven 100 times can suddenly feel foreign the moment you actually pay attention to it. She paid attention on a Thursday evening in October, when the last of the light was leaving the windows and she had forgotten to turn on the lamp. She stood at one end of the hallway, her hand still on the bedroom door frame, and looked down the length of it, and found that she could not see the other end. This, she told herself, was simply the dark. But she stood there for a moment longer than she intended. The hallway was narrow and old, the kind of narrow that houses built before certain centuries understood about personal space. The floorboards were warped in a long, gentle curve, not enough to trip on, but enough to make your footsteps feel uneven, as though the house itself was breathing slightly beneath you. The wallpaper, cream with a faint pattern of pale flowers, had separated at the seams in places, curling away from the plaster with the slow patience of something peeling back. And at the end of the hallway, at the very end, further than the bathroom, further than the linen cupboard, further than logic seemed to allow, there was a door. It was dark wood. Older than the rest of the house somehow, though Sarah couldn't have said why she felt that. Older in the way some things carry age not in their appearance but in their presence. The way a stone worn smooth by a river feels ancient even in your hand. The door had no visible keyhole, no handle that she had ever tried. Just a dark wooden surface, slightly recessed into the wall, with a thin line of shadow framing it on all sides. The estate agent had said nothing about it. Sarah had not asked. She began to notice other things after that. The way the hallway's floorboards whispered differently near the far end, not the ordinary creak of settling wood, but something closer to a murmur. A breath of sound, very faint, that seemed to come from beneath the floor rather than from it. She would stop mid-step and listen, and it would stop too. And then, after a moment, she would hear it again, just at the edge of hearing, just below the threshold of certainty. She told herself it was the pipes. She told herself it was the wind. She told herself all the ordinary things you tell yourself, and they were almost enough. The key appeared on a Monday. She found it on the kitchen table beside her mug of half-finished tea, in the way that objects sometimes simply appear in the places where you left other things. It was an old key. Iron, she thought, heavy for its size, with a long barrel and a bow worked into an intricate shape she couldn't quite name. Not a cross, not a circle. Something between the two, or something that suggested both without committing to either. It was warm in her hand. Warmer than the room. Warm in the way that metal is warm when it has been held. Sarah stood at the kitchen table for a long moment, turning the key over in her palm. She looked around the kitchen. The window above the sink showed her the gray October garden. The clock on the wall said 11:20. The house was quiet. She had no idea where it had come from. She set it down. She finished her tea. She went to bed. In the morning, the key was still there. She began to carry it without meaning to. She didn't decide to pick it up again. It simply appeared in her pocket at the end of the day, and she had no clear memory of putting it there. It was always warm, always the same weight. She would find herself turning it over in her fingers while she was reading, or waiting for the kettle, or lying in the half-dark before sleep. The shape of it became familiar. The weight of it became something she noticed only in its absence. At night, she would hear the sounds from the hallway. Not loud, never loud. A low, soft murmur, somewhere between the creak of wood and something less explicable. A breathing quality to it, almost. A rhythm she couldn't quite count. She would lie still and listen, and it would continue for a while, unhurried, and then it would stop. Not abruptly, just quietly. The way a conversation ends, when everyone has run out of things to say. She stopped going to the end of the hallway after dark, or rather, she tried to. She would find herself standing there anyway, not walking toward it deliberately, but arriving. The way you find yourself in a room and cannot remember deciding to go there. She would be at the end of the hallway, close enough to reach out and touch the dark wood of the door, and she would not remember the walk that brought her there. Just the standing, just the stillness, just the faint warmth of the key in her closed hand. On the 15th night, she heard a sound she could not explain away. It was not a murmur, not a creak. It was something more deliberate, a single, soft knock from somewhere on the other side of the door. Not a knock that demanded anything, not urgent, not insistent, just present, the way a person stands quietly at a door without pressing their weight against it. A knock that said, "I am here, I have been here, I have noticed you." Sarah stood very still in the hallway. The dark gathered around her in that way dark has when you are paying too much attention to it. Leaning in slightly, becoming more than the simple absence of light. Her feet were cold on the warped floorboards. Her breathing had slowed. In her pocket, the key was very warm. She did not knock back. She turned around slowly and walked back to her room and closed her door and sat on the edge of her bed for a long time with her hands in her lap and the key in her palm and listened to the house settle around her. It did not knock again that night. But she knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who has understood something they cannot understand, that it would. And she knew something else, something she had been circling for days without naming. Whatever was on the other side of that door was not waiting to be let in. It was waiting for her to come through. She sat with this for a long while. The house was very still. Outside, rain had begun. Soft and even, tapping at the window glass with a patience she found almost comforting. She turned the key over in her fingers and thought about doors, about the ones we open without thinking, about the ones we stand before for years, about what it means to choose, not whether to open something, but whether you are ready for what opens in you when you do. She thought about the estate agent and the blank look that crossed his face when she asked, later, much later, in a phone call she had kept vague and careful, whether there was anything unusual about the property. A pause. Then, not that I'm aware of. She thought about the way he had hesitated. She stood up. She walked to her bedroom door and opened it and looked down the hallway. Dark, still. The warped floorboards disappearing into the far end where the lamp's reach gave out. And there, just visible, the outline of the door, its dark wood, its thin line of shadow around all four edges. And at the bottom of the door, very faint, almost nothing, a thin line of something she had not noticed before. Not light. She would not have called it light. More like the suggestion of light, the memory of it. The way a room holds warmth for a moment after the fire has been put out. Sarah stood in her doorway and looked at it for a long time. Then she stepped back. She closed her bedroom door. She placed the key on her bedside table and lay down, and pulled the blanket up and listened to the rain on the glass. The hallway was quiet. The key was warm on the table beside her. And somewhere at the end of the long, dark corridor, past the warped floorboards and the peeling wallpaper and the reach of every lamp, the door waited. The way it had always waited. Patient. Still. Without urgency. As though it understood, better than she did, that some doors don't need to be opened. They only need you to keep coming back. Thank you for listening to Stillwater Chronicles, where even the quietest hallways carry something waiting at the end. If this stillness stayed with you, if the warmth of that key settled somewhere in your hand, then let it remain a little while longer. Some doors, after all, were never meant to be opened. They were only ever meant to be stood before. Rest now, the hallway will keep.